Welcome to Mode Bespoke. I'm Atenas. For today's project, we're going to be working on a summer tank top worked entirely in Tunisian crochet. So let's get started. So let's start with our measurements, and you're going to need to take the bust measurement. And we're going to be working on 2 panels to make this shirt, so just take the front part. So measure just below one armpit all the way around to the other side. Your second measurement is going to be your shoulder to bust. This is just from the shoulder to the center or the apex of your bust. The next measurement is the bust to hip. So this is going to go from the apex of your bust down to however long you want your shirt to be. So let's begin with the front panel of our shirt. We're going to make a chain, so we're going to begin with a slip knot. So wrap the yarn around 2 fingers, insert your hook into the loop, grab the yarn in the back and pull it through that loop. And then just remove your fingers and pull on the 2 threads of yarn to tighten your slip knot. So let me zoom in and we'll begin our chain. Now you don't need to make it in multiples of anything, so you can make as many stitches as you want. So we're going to wrap the yarn around our hook and pull that top loop through the bottom loop of the hook. So yarn over and pull through the loop. Yarn over, pull through the loop, and continue chaining until you have a length that measures that bust measurement you took. So it doesn't have to be in multiples of anything. You can chain as many stitches as you want. Just make sure that it is the length of the bust. Now if you want a loose fitting shirt, add about 1/2 inch to that measurement. Alright, so let's begin to cast on. We're going to work into that second chain from our hook. We're going to insert our hook into that stitch, then you're going to yarn over, and you're going to pull up a loop, and leave that loop on your hook. Now go to the next stitch, insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. Again, leave that loop on your hook. And just continue to cast on loops on your hook until you have 1 loop on your hook for every stitch of the chain. So once you reach this last stitch and you've cast on all of your stitches, you have to work a return pass. And this is a regular return pass. So yarn over, and you're going to pull through 1 loop. So pull that off of your hook. And then for the rest of the row, you're going to yarn over and pull through 2. So yarn over, pull through 1, 2. And then yarn over, pull through 1, 2. And then you just continue until you are left with just 1 loop on your hook. And the return pass is going to be the same for every single one of the rows. So I'll just call it a regular return pass, and that way you know which one I'm referring to. Now once you've finished your foundation row, we're going to move on to the first of our 2 row repeats. So here is the stitch. As you can see, it's made up of 2 threads, or 2 loops, or 2 legs, whatever you want to call it. We're going to work a knit stitch, so you're going to insert your hook between those 2 loops. Now skip this first stitch. Go right into that second vertical stitch, and you're going to insert your hook between the 2 loops, yarn over, and cast on again. So let's repeat in the next one. Insert your hook, yarn over, and cast on. So insert your hook, and that's in between both of the loops or the legs, whatever you want to call it, that make up that vertical stitch. So this first row is just a row of Tunisian knit stitch. Now remember to crochet here into this last stitch of the row, so into that final stitch, you're going to have to cast on a stitch as well. So insert your hook right here behind both of those loops, yarn over, and cast on 1. Now once you finish casting on your stitches, you're going to work a regular return pass. So remember to work yarn over, pull through 1, and then yarn over, pull through 2 until you are left with just 1 loop on your hook. And there's our first row. Now the second row, we're also going to work into the second vertical stitch, only for this row, you're going to insert your hook behind both of those loops or both of those legs. So you're going to grab both of them like this, and this time we're going to work a double crochet. So you're going to need to yarn over and then insert your hook behind the 2 loops of the second vertical stitch. So there are my 2 loops. Yarn over again and pull up a loop. Now you would have cast on 2 loops for this stitch, so you're going to yarn over and pull through those 2 loops for a double crochet. So I'll show you here again, and I'll do this one a little bit more slowly. So you're going to yarn over and you're going to insert your hook behind both of the legs of the stitch. So there's my vertical stitch and both of the legs. Now you're going to yarn over and pull up a loop. So then yarn over and pull through the first 2 loops of your hook, just like you would a double crochet. Alright, so let's repeat here. Yarn over, insert your hook behind the 2 loops of the stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then you're going to yarn over and pull through 2 loops. So for all of you using the written pattern for this tutorial, this is called the double crochet, so just continue to work a double crochet for the rest of the row. So that's it. Those are the 2 rows that we're going to be repeating. So it's going to be a row of knit stitch and a row of double crochets. And you're going to continue this pattern until your fabric measures the length that you wanted for your shirt. So this is going to be the bust to hip measurement. Alright, so we're at the end of the row, and I'm going to stitch my final stitch here. So I'm just going to cast on my last stitch. So just insert my hook, yarn over, and pull up a loop. And now that I'm all cast on, I'm going to work a return pass. But that's it. It's really, really easy to complete this fabric. So I just finished these last 2. So once you finish this row, you're going to notice that instead of having a curl, you're going to have a bit more like a fold. And this is just going to create a nice little bottom border for our shirt. But it's only going to happen after the first 2 rows. After that, you're not going to have any more curl on your stitch. So now let's repeat the knit stitch row, and this is going to be row number, 3? So row number 3. So beginning on the second vertical stitch from your hook, you're going to begin to cast on a knit stitch, and you're going to repeat this in every stitch of the row. Now once you finish your row, I'll show you what our netting is going to start to look like, because our stitching is going to start to take shape. So let me cast on this last stitch, and I'll pull on this little, and there it is. So there is that stretched out netting look. So now let me complete this return pass. So all of your odd numbered rows are going to be knit stitch, and all of your even numbered rows are going to be a double crochet. So once you finish this row, here you go. Just begin your next row by crocheting another repeat of our double crochet. So yarn over, insert your hook behind the 2 loops of that second vertical stitch from our hook, and then yarn over and pull through 2 loops. So yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. And then you just repeat the same stitch until you complete the entire row. Now for the rest of your fabric, you're going to just repeat the knit stitch and then your row of double crochet. So then when you're done with your fabric, it's going to measure across. It's going to measure the bust measurement you took, and 1/2 inch if you added that. And the length of your fabric is going to be the bust to hip measurement, or whatever measurement you took, just to get the length. Once you have your fabric completed, so here's the front panel. I'll show you what I'm going to do next. We're going to work on the triangles. Now for the triangles, you're going to use the bust to shoulder measurement. So here's the bust, and that's from the apex to the shoulder. So you will probably have to adjust this a little bit further along, but use this as your guide, and then don't weave in any of your ends when you finish. So here's the fabric. As I finished it, it is going to have a diagonal slant to it. You can block this piece right before you sew it, so once you finish your triangles, or you can just block it at the end, which is what I did. So just pull on your fabric, it'll lay out straight, don't worry. You'll take the diagonal out of it. But then our next step is going to be to fold our fabric in half. So you're going to need a stitch marker here. So once you fold this in half, make sure that you line up your corners very well. You're going to put a stitch marker on that fold. So let's just put one right there. It tells me that that's about the halfway mark. So now you're going to go through and count your stitches to make sure that you have the same number of stitches on the right side as the left. So I just count on these little knots because I ended on a double crochet row. So I don't count that first vertical stitch, I start counting from the second one. So just count all of your stitches, make sure you have the same number on both sides of your shirt because you want both of your triangles to match. So depending on whether you crocheted an odd or an even number of stitches, this stitch marker can be placed either between stitches or right in the middle of one stitch. So mine's placed right between the two loops of one stitch. Now whether yours looks like mine or not, it doesn't matter. You just need to make sure that it is at the centermost point so both of your triangles match. So whether you have to split a stitch or you're right between two stitches, just make sure you're at the centermost point. So now for our decreases, since I am beginning with a knit stitch row, I'm going to skip that first vertical stitch and I'm going to cast on a Tunisian simple stitch in that second vertical stitch. So just insert your hook behind that top loop and immediately knit stitch into the loop right after. So it's the third loop from your hook. So knit stitch on that one, then yarn over and pull through both of the stitches. So the knit stitch and that Tunisian simple stitch. Alright, so now we're going to move on to that fourth vertical stitch from our hook, and we're just going to knit stitch and then knit stitch in the fifth and in the sixth, and just continue to knit stitch, and that's a regular knit stitch until you have two vertical stitches left right before that stitch marker. So let me cast these on real quick, and I've reached the stitch marker, so here we go. So this is what I mean. So I've got my two vertical stitches and my stitch marker right here. Now remember that it doesn't matter whether you placed your stitch marker between the two legs of a stitch or whether you placed it between two different stitches. You still need to have two vertical stitches right before you get to that stitch marker so you can do your decrease. Now for the decrease, we're going to Tunisian simple stitch in that first of the two last vertical stitches and then immediately knit stitch in the second vertical stitch. Yarn over and just pull through both of those loops. And now here on that very last stitch, wherever it is you have your stitch marker, you have to cast on your final stitch. So in my case, I'm going to knit stitch because my stitch marker is right between the two stitches. Now, if your stitch marker is placed between two stitches, so right here, so right in this chain space right there, all you do is just insert your hook into that chain space, yarn over, and just cast on a loop like that. That's it. That's what I say. It doesn't matter where your stitch marker is. You'll be fine either way. We'll make it work. So I'm just going to knit stitch here my last one because again my stitch marker is halfway, I guess, between one stitch. But once you're through with that and you've cast on, you're just going to work a regular return pass. And that's how you're going to decrease in every knit stitch row. So now let me show you how to decrease in every double crochet row. So this is going to be very similar to the previous row in that you have to knit two stitches together. So we're going to begin in the second and third vertical stitch, and just like we did when you're crocheting this row, you're going to insert your hook behind both loops of that stitch. Alright, so let's begin with a yarn over, and then I'm going to insert my hook behind both of the loops of that second vertical stitch and the third vertical stitch. So all of the loops, you're going to see 4 loops or 4 legs on your hook. Yarn over and pull through all of those. Now you're going to see our 3 loops on our hook. Remember to yarn over and pull through 2. And there you go. So that was our decrease. Now for the rest of the row, you're just going to complete a regular double crochet. Remember to leave the last 2 vertical stitches of the row plus your final stitch. So you have cast on a final stitch now, so you're going to have to keep an eye out for that. But let me continue to cast these on and get to the end of the row, and I'll show you that decrease one more time. So now I'm at the end of the row, and as you can see we have 2 vertical stitches, so there they are. There's the first one and the second one, plus that final stitch of the row. So now let's decrease on these last 2 vertical stitches. So just like we did at the beginning of the row, you're going to yarn over and insert your hook behind the legs of both of those stitches. So it's all 4 legs. Then you're going to yarn over and pull up a loop, and then just yarn over and pull through 2 loops. And then don't forget to cast on in this final stitch of the row. And there you go. So you've done a decrease at the beginning of the row and a decrease at the end of the row. And you're going to repeat this over and over again. So you're going to repeat the knit stitch decreases right after this, and then the double crochet decreases. So after a few row repeats, your triangle is going to start to take shape. So continue to repeat until you have one stitch and one decrease side by side. And then you can work the strap. So let me show you what it's going to look like here once you've completed a few rows. So here I'm at the top, and I've got 3 stitches left. So I've got 3 vertical stitches left. This is a double crochet row, so I'm going to work a decrease in the first 2 vertical stitches, and then just a regular decrease in that last one, and then just cast on that final stitch. And then I'm going to work a return pass. And this is what our final row is going to look like. So you're going to have 2 vertical stitches, and that's just going to be 1 decrease. So this is a knit stitch row for me. So I'm just going to knit stitch my decrease right here, pull up a loop, and then do my final stitch. And I'm going to have 3 loops left on my hook for my return pass. So once you reach this point right here with those 3 loops on your hook, you know that you are done with your decreases. So let me finish this return pass, and that's it. So your triangle is finished. So all we have to do now is the strap. So before we move on to the strap, let me explain something about this fabric real quick. This fabric stretches a lot lengthwise. So I just crocheted maybe about 10 stitches for the strap, and then I didn't weave any ends. I didn't do any of that because you will have to adjust it. So you're probably going to have to pull out a few stitches, but you won't know how many stitches you're going to have to pull out until after you've tried on your shirt. So you're going to pin it together and try it on before we sew it together. So just make sure you make anywhere between 5 to 10 stitches for the strap so that you have a way to try it on, and then we can adjust that. So here, let me grab my work, and then I'll show you how to make the strap real quick. And if you remember, we just have 1 vertical stitch now. So there's that 1 little vertical stitch right in the center. You're just going to knit stitch into that. So just knit stitch and then cast on that final stitch of the row. And that's it. So you'll have 3 loops on your hook. So then yarn over and pull through 1, then yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and then knit stitch again. So that's it. You're just going to work anywhere between 5 to 10 rows of knit stitch. And then remember to just cut your yarn once you are done, but do not weave in any ends so that you can easily pull out stitches if you see that you need to right before sewing your shirt together. So now everything we've done for this triangle, the number of rows, the number of rows that you did for your strap, all of that, you're going to have to repeat it on that second triangle. So I will start it with you just in case you have any questions about that stitch marker placement and how you would begin your row. But before we get there, let's do that bind off row here for our strap, because you will need to do that bind off row. So you're going to insert your hook into the stitch, just like if you were pulling up a knit stitch, and then you're going to have 2 loops on your hook. You're going to single crochet. So yarn over and pull through 2. And then you're going to do the same thing on this final stitch of the row. So just insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then single crochet. So yarn over and pull through 2. So if you pull out stitches from your strap, remember to do a bind off row. That way you'll have a nice clean edge to sew along further along in the process here, because you are going to have to sew the straps together. So just make sure you make that bind off. So let's go back to this center stitch marker. I'm going to grab a different color yarn just so it's a little bit easier to see what I'm doing. But you're going to need to remove this stitch marker, and just remember whether you placed your stitch marker between 2 stitches or between 2 legs of 1 vertical stitch. So here we are. So I'm going to begin with just the folks that began right in between the 2 stitches. So let's pretend that my stitch marker was right in between 2 vertical stitches. Insert your hook into that chain space. You're going to make a loop on your hook and pull that through the stitch. Make sure you leave a really long tail end of yarn. You're going to weave that in later, but it's going to be helpful when your stitch starts loosening up. Alright, so we're going to begin right off the bat with our knit stitch decrease. So just immediately do your decrease and then begin with a knit stitch in all but the last 2 vertical stitches of the row. Now, you're going to notice that this first stitch is going to loosen up a lot. And that's why you have a long tail and a yarn, because you can just pull on that. You will have to pull on it periodically as you are working on this row so that your stitches don't pull out completely, because you will lose your stitches. So you're just going to continue the triangle the same way we did the last one. Remember to do your decrease at the end of the row as well with those last 2 vertical stitches. Okay, so now for the folks that ended just like I did, and you had a stitch marker right in between the 2 legs of a vertical stitch, you're just going to insert your hook in between both of those legs. Yarn over and pull up a loop. And like I said before, leave a long tail end of yarn. And then immediately begin with your decreases. So Tunisian simple stitch in the first stitch, and then immediately knit stitch in the next stitch. So complete that second triangle like we did the first one. And now let's move on to the back panel. So you're going to make another piece of fabric that also measures the bust and the bust to hip measurement. So it's just another square piece of fabric. Once you have completed your second square, you're going to need to place a stitch marker in that center fold again. And you're going to do the same thing we did for the first square we did. And you're going to count your stitches and make sure you have the same number on both sides. Now we're going to need to place some stitch markers just to outline where we're going to make the back straps. So we're going to need to fold our fabric, and we're going to fold it into thirds. So I'm going to bring that center stitch marker along with one of the edges to the center of one of those halves. So you're essentially folding it into thirds, but you're going to have one really long third in the back and then 2 little short ones. So I'm going to place a stitch marker right on my fold, and then I'm going to place a stitch marker here on that other fold. So it's very similar to what we did in that front panel, only now we're adding a few more stitch markers. So here we go. So once your stitch markers are done, you're going to repeat this on that second side. So if you notice, we have these 2 stitch markers, and then we have a big section here in the middle, and then 2 smaller sections. So what we're going to do is a repeat of the triangles that we did in the front, but these are going to be smaller. So we don't need them to be quite as big. They're just going to help support the shirt from the back. So we're going to make these smaller triangles, and then we're going to do the same thing on the second half of our shirt. So just like we folded this first half, you're going to do the same on this second half. That way you can have all of your stitch markers just placed and ready to go. Make sure that you also count your stitches so that you have the same number of stitches in all of your sections. Alright, so once you have placed all of your stitch markers, your work should look a little more like this. So you should have this big section in the middle, and then these 2 little sections on the side, and then you have your center stitch marker, and then a repeat on the other side. Now on this small section, so beginning right where we have our hook, we're going to work a bind off row. And that's going to be from this little section in the center to our first stitch marker. So that one right there. So to work this, you're going to make a series of single crochets. So you're going to insert your hook into the stitch like if you were crocheting a knit stitch. So yarn over and pull up a loop. When you have 2 loops on your hook, you're going to yarn over and pull through 2. So you're just going to make a single crochet. So let's repeat in the next stitch. You just yarn over, pull up a loop, and then yarn over and pull through 2 to single crochet. So insert our hook into the stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. So we're just going to repeat this until we get to that first stitch marker, and we're doing this so that we close off the stitches at the very top row, and so that we have a nice clean edge, especially where we don't have any of the triangles coming up. So we want to create a nice clean little edge. So there we go. I've got just another stitch or 2 left here. There we go. Alright, so I'm at the stitch marker. Alright, so our stitch marker is right here, and it's followed by this big section right here. So that was that big third that we marked off. This is going to be our triangle. So here we're just going to continue doing the same stitches that we did when we worked on that triangle in the first section of our shirt. So we're just going to begin with a decrease, and that's a knit stitch decrease, and I'm just going to cast on all of these stitches up until I get to that second stitch marker. So for me, I ended in a row of double crochets, so I'm working this row as a knit stitch. So I'm just going to cast on the remaining stitches, Here we go, I'm at the end and I've got my last 2 vertical stitches. So I have to work a decrease in those last 2 vertical stitches. So there's my knit stitch decrease. And then I'm just going to cast on a stitch right here in that space right between 2 stitches. And then I'm going to work a return pass. And again, this is just a regular return pass. Once I finish the return pass, I'm going to begin to cast on my double crochet stitches, and we are working a decrease. So remember that we are just working a repetition of our triangle, just like we did in that first part of our shirt. So just continue to work your stitches. I'm going to finish making this triangle, and then I'll show you what it looks like. So I'll set this down and show you guys in case you're a little bit more advanced and you want to continue. So there's our triangle, and in this section right between our 2 triangles, you're going to work your bind off, and then you're going to work a bind off here in that last section as well. So the top of your completed back panel should look a little like this. You'll have your triangles, and then you'll have your single crochet bind off in between the triangles. And also, quick reminder to just make the straps. So once you finish those triangles, use your shoulder to bust measurement to measure out how long the straps need to be. Remember to leave the ends unwoven so that you can adjust it later when you measure your shirt. Now, once you have both the front and the back panel ready, you're going to need some stitch markers or some safety pins or something, and we're going to pin it together, and then you're going to try the shirt on. So make sure that you pin the back panel to the front panel, and you're going to have to pin your straps as well. I have already tried my shirt on, so I was able to mark how much of the strap I needed to get rid of, because like I said before, this is really stretchy lengthwise. So you really want to try this on. So I'm going to get rid of about 1 inch of the straps, both the front and the back strap, and since I didn't weave in any ends, this will be quite easy to do. I will have to work my row of bind off again once I pull out all of the stitches. So to pin the top part, just line up the top stitch, so this top row of the back panel, with this corner along the side triangle, and then pin all the way along to the bottom of the shirt. And what I like to do, just so I don't have to crochet a really wide shirt, is to leave the bottom part of my shirt open. So I counted about 5 rows, and I did try on the shirt prior to just randomly deciding how many rows to leave. I tried it on, and then I pulled out some of the stitch markers to decide how wide I wanted that opening or the slit at the bottom to be. So now let's sew our shirt closed. Now if you look here at the bottom, I've placed a stitch marker where I want that opening to end. So that little bottom slit on my shirt, placed a stitch marker just to make sure that I don't sew this part closed. And then I'm going to sew between that bottom stitch marker and the very top of the shirt. So to sew this, I found it was a little easier to sew this if you flip your shirt inside out, because it's easier to line up the stitching. So if you see these, they kind of look like chain stitches. That is the back of our Tunisian stitching. So that's where we're going to sew, and it's a lot easier to line it up if you have your shirt inside out. So once you've got a piece of thread, and then I'm just using the same yarn that I used to stitch, and your yarn needle, you're going to line up the 2 top ends. So just look for right here on the front panel, it's where your decreases begin. So where those decreases begin, and that first row on the back panel, the topmost row, you're just going to give that a few stitches along the top. So let me stitch real quick up here. And you just want to do 2 or 3 stitches just to make sure it's not going to pop open. And now we're going to line up this raised stitching right here, which is the return pass. So line those up, and you're just going to stitch going through one panel of the shirt, so the front panel towards the back, or whichever way you chose to hold your shirt. But go through both panels. And then here, let me hold this up on camera so everyone can actually see. So we're going to stitch here, and for this I'm also using 1 or 2 stitches, just to make sure that they're nice and tight. And then here's that second return pass. So that's how the back of the return pass looks. So I'm just going to insert my needle here in this front panel, go all the way through the back panel, and I'm just going to stitch. So there we go, make sure that's not all knotted up. And there we go. So I'm going to skip the open stitches and go right next to the next pair of return pass stitches. And that's where I'm going to sew again. So sewing on those return passes, so as you can see, those are the raised stitching. It makes it a lot easier to hide your stitching, and it'll make it so that your shirt doesn't have a very visible seam. And once you finish, so here I've already finished sewing this side, and I'll back up here so you can see, you won't be able to see this seam very much once you block your shirt, so it'll be nearly invisible. Now finish sewing all of the sides of your shirt, including the top straps, and then weave in all of your ends. So make sure you weave those in very, very well so your shirt doesn't become unraveled. Alright, let's talk about blocking. So because this is a nice loose fitting tank, all I did was I wet the shirt. So just wet it so that it's dripping wet, and I just like to hang mine in the shower and just wait for it to dry. So that might be a day or two, and once it's dry, it's ready to go. And that's it. So that was our tutorial for today. A special thanks goes out to Habiba Webb for requesting this project. And if you have a project that you would like to see, just leave it down in the comment section below. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button. And if you want to see more of my work, you can follow me on Instagram. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I will see you all in the next tutorial.